Gary Vaynerchuk tweeted on Twitter saying, hey, I'm looking for help on YouTube. More than half of our clients, which is conflict delayed is conflict multiplied. Having to fire my best friend from high school, 2 failed business partnerships. One of the hardest parts about business is relationships. Any level of fear that you're experiencing now, the anxiety that you have around what people are going to think if you fail, or what your parents might say, or what your friends will think, there's no way. You know, there's absolutely no shot he would hire somebody like me. But I have nothing to lose here, are completely irrelevant, and everything is cringe until it's not. So you might as well create content, you might as well start the podcast, you might as well start the business and put yourself out there. There was a girl in my English class who played one of my videos out loud, and I remember sitting there wanting to die. But if you're dead set on leaving,
the person that I have on this podcast is probably the most mature 19-year-old that I ever met in my life. He's the most, when I met him for the first time, he seemed like someone who was very regimented, very much a 35-year-old head on a 19-year-old shoulder, really well articulated with how he thinks about the things, really, really good with numbers, and most of all, a very hardworking person. Over the years of working with him and being around him and just seeing him grow, all of those things have been factually correct. And I'm really excited to have him on this podcast because I'm curious about a lot of things that we never unlocked over the years. And so this one's going to be a fun one. And the person is Calvin Hamilton.
hey, I'm Calvin Hamilton, and this is episode 12 of Whitespace.
Thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
The way that I started this podcast is, and I love how we just like we're talking right now and we just like sure. reset this conversation. But the way I like to start this podcast is, who were you as a kid, and why do you think that has almost formed who are you today?
There's so many different directions that I can take this, but in a nutshell, I was very much so a lemonade stand type of kid. I had my first business idea when I was like 5 years old, and I drew out the logo for this business called Cat C, and my parents got it printed on a poster for me. I don't know what it was supposed to be, but we have it still, so that's fun. Cool. I was never a particularly good student in school. I did very, very well in school up until 5th grade because I was in the public school system in Phoenix, Arizona, which is like 49th out of 50 in the country. It is not a very good system. So it was also very easy. So I could do super well without trying. Come 5th grade, my parents moved me to a local private school that was known for being much more intense. And almost instantaneously, my straight A's dropped to like C's and B's. And for my family, it was considered essentially unacceptable results. And they were very confused as to why I wasn't willing to put effort into studies. I think it was twofold. One was a sincere disinterest in whatever was happening in the classroom. Just a lot of it didn't seem very useful. But the other was that growing up, my entire experience with education was that I didn't have to try. I didn't really have to do homework. I didn't really have to study. You just showed up and you did well. So throughout middle school and high school, I wasn't a particularly strong student, but it was also around that same time in middle school that I got really deep into gaming. And it was through gaming that I found out about this niche, quirky site called YouTube, which is where the only thing it was really known for was videos like Charlie Bit Me. You know, it was essentially a meme site where occasionally a video would go viral and people would talk about it. But people were recording themselves playing the video games I like to play, namely Call of Duty. And then they would upload it to YouTube and sometimes add commentary or add special effects, and they were making gaming videos. I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. And so I got deep into playing video games, specifically Call of Duty, making montages, making commentaries. I did that from the time I was like 10 or 11 all the way through the end of high school. And it was through doing this that I got into marketing and kind of the creator economy space and video editing and graphic design and a handful of other things. But I would say that was really my life growing up. beyond that, there's a bunch of other facets. I'm a middle child, which a lot of people say that there are certain implications of being a middle child. I have 2 wonderful parents. My mom is extremely hardworking. My dad is as well. Both came from effectively nothing in one way or another, but now they have a lot more than nothing. So I think seeing that, gave me some level of respect for hard work. And yeah, I've always been into fitness, sports, etc. I don't know. I would say that that's a very high level version.
Love that. I'm going to unpack that a little bit. Why do you think at 5 you were already thinking about logos? Like what in your first 5 years of your life was like driving that?
I'm going to sound like GaryVee here. I would give my mom a lot of credit for that, because this is something I've talked to some friends about. The single thing, if you can distill it down to a single thing, that she did for me that helped me be creative and willing to pursue the things that I thought I was interested in, was that if I mentioned something to her, she immediately would jump on it and say like, great, how do we make that happen? How do we push it forward? So the fact that I scribbled some logo on a piece of paper and her response to that is, let's get a banner of this printed for you so that you can figure out what you want to do with it, is phenomenal. So few parents would ever consider doing something like that. When I expressed interest in playing violin, she got me violin lessons. When I expressed interest in a certain language or a sport, they would figure out ways for me to kind of get involved, to try those things. So I think that my parents really encouraged that. And in many ways, I would say that that gave me some level of what I consider now to be entrepreneurial ADHD, where, you have shiny object syndrome. There are so many things that are always interesting and you want to explore them. Simultaneously, I think it gave me the courage to actually try in a world where a lot of people don't always feel that they have that because they're scared of failure. I just never really cared. It didn't occur to me that that was something to be concerned about. I was willing to start something and not necessarily finish it if something else called my attention.
That's so cool. What do you think is the reason for how thoughtful and articulate you are with your communication? Like, you don't meet an average 19-year-old just like have such thoughtfulness about their communication. And like, I never saw you not pause. Like exactly when I asked you, who were you as a kid? You paused for like 5 seconds to just think through what you wanted to say. And I think that's just who you are. And I've seen this over the years. And like, what's that really in your environment that actually created that for you?
I have smart parents, so that helps.
What do they do?
My mom now runs a nonprofit back in Phoenix, but she used to be an executive at the local utility, which is like the Con Ed of Phoenix. And my dad worked in sales. He sold software primarily to hospitals, but he kind of had a variety of jobs when I was growing up. At one point, he was working in India, and so he would be gone for a few weeks at a time, while he was in Bangalore or elsewhere. So, but I think that there are a couple of things here. To some degree, I do think that you have like a predisposition for it. Some people just speak well. I think I've always had that to some degree. The second thing, honestly, is that making YouTube videos at a very young age and having to listen to yourself as you're editing the video and hear all the ums and the times that you click your tongue and the times that you say something stupid and you're trying to be funny, but it's not, makes you very aware of how you want to communicate compared to how you naturally communicate. And I think having done that for like 10 years almost, from the point that I was, it's a little less than that, but call it from early middle school through end of high school, it forces you to think about things most people don't consider. Most people don't really listen to themselves talk. They just talk.
Yeah.
And if you force yourself to really listen to the words that you're saying and question whether or not the words that you are saying are the words that you actually want to say to communicate the idea that you have in your head that you're trying to plant in somebody else's head, I think what you would find is that 99% of the world would choose different language. Another big way that I was able to kind of find that within myself was also just through writing. I ended up scripting a lot of my YouTube videos as time went on because I found that that's a better way of getting clear thoughts communicated. I had a really, really hard English class my freshman year of high school, Dr. Allison. It was incredibly difficult. I got a D. It was the only D I've ever gotten when I was in school. But oh my God, it was so helpful just for understanding word structure, grammar, vocabulary. The irony is that at the time, there were so many moments throughout taking that class where I was like, this is so useless. There's no world in which I'm ever going to appreciate reading the Odyssey or the Bible as in literature. But come to find out, it's extremely relevant. Jordan Peterson, who I know is a pretty controversial character, has this quote, which is that you should be a monster. You should be very dangerous. And the way that you do that is that you take care of yourself physically, you take care of yourself mentally, and you know how to communicate well. Because if you can communicate well and you're in good shape and good health, like, there's nothing that can really touch you.
Fair. I mean, there's more to that, but like,
sure.
But yeah, it puts you in a better position for sure.
It just makes you a real weapon in society, for good or for bad. But
I can see that.
It's the reason why, I don't think there's any surprise that Ben Shapiro is as big as he is. Ben Shapiro is just sharp. He's a great communicator. Regardless if you love his political views or hate them, it's not important. If you just evaluate his ability to speak, he's remarkable. And that's undoubtedly why he's gotten as large as he is.
Every creator on the internet that anyone knows of right now, they're a great communicator. That's or
funny or entertaining.
Any great leader out there as well at any company, anyone that's growing through the ranks. The thing that starts differentiating you from like being a manager to being a leader eventually is your communication and your relationships. How you are with people and how you communicate with people is going to define how far you grow. And that's life as well. So yeah, I align with that. Let's talk about the YouTube then. Like you're starting to be in this YouTube world that's pretty new. Again, when you were 10, this is like YouTube's probably pretty new at that time.
It was super young,
right?
I mean, we're talking 2009, maybe 2008.
So it's like there's probably very little information out there of how to make the perfect. Like now you have tools, you have so many different options of like, you can now test 3 thumbnails. You have like, there's so much that you can do on YouTube. But like at that time, it was like so basic. What were the things that you were trying to do and where were you learning them from? Like what was your learning mechanism at that point?
So, I mean, when I got into making gaming videos, really, truly, it was just for fun.
What was your gamer tag?
I had a few, but to start, my first gamer tag ever was Camo Master 2. Then I was Silent Killer 159. Then Lforge. The list kind of goes on. But the one that's kind of an homage to what I do now is the gamer tag that I had for the longest period of time was called Resi, which is what I named the current company. And it's just an homage to how I got started. But I really got into it for fun. There was no monetary upside on YouTube these days. Like they didn't have ads on the platform. It was just that I liked playing video games. It was cool to film it and I was doing something new. It turned a passion into a project that was fun, somewhat applicable. After doing that for a couple of years, you would look at other creators and you would see a lot of them have really cool edits, or their thumbnails are cool, or the channel art, when YouTube had more interesting channel art, they went down the sides of the banner and stuff. And, I was, call it 12 years old at the time. And so I can't afford to hire a designer to make these things for me or hire a video editor to make my videos better. So I would look up on YouTube, what software do people use to edit their videos? Or you'd hear somebody talk about it via Skype because that's what they used before Discord. And they'd say Adobe After Effects and Photoshop. Great. How much does that cost? At the time to buy a license was like $1,000 or something crazy. So, okay, how do you get Adobe Photoshop for free? And you end up torrenting it, and then you look up tutorials, and like that was how I learned. And it was all just with the in pursuit of wanting to do better at this silly project online. There was no other reason. And it was through that eventually that YouTube enabled ads on the platform. These third-party companies called multi-channel networks got involved, which helped partner gaming channels. And through all of these things, I kind of found out that, oh, there's actually real career viability here. But the early days were the scrappiest version of just learning anything when you have no resources. You have a computer and an internet connection, figure it out.
That's so cool. Like, I think it's like when you're like, this is where like almost most things were like right now, when you think about social media, for example, like if you're on a platform that's new, this is how you're actually learning over there. You are experimenting. You're trying to almost recreate from your previous learnings and see what can you implement. But it's like, there's no blueprint. It's a new platform. You gotta figure it out. So that's fun to see how you were doing it for YouTube early on. Once the money started coming in, like there was advertisers and things like that, like, did you think that you were going to do this full time? Like, did you actually think that forget school, like let's do this? Or that was never going to be an option with your parents?
To a degree. So I would say that by 7th or 8th grade, when advertising on YouTube was properly a thing, and the big channels, and big back in these days, just for context, I think Smosh was the biggest channel, and it probably had like 10 million subscribers. But the big gaming channels usually had like 200,000, and those were the biggest in the space. So nothing like what you see today in terms of numbers, but the big channels were making a few $1,000s a month. So it was a real living that they were able to make. It wasn't lavish. It wasn't, what Kai Cenat makes nowadays. But at the time, for playing video games, that was pretty cool. So it became apparent to me that there was a career path here. I didn't know how viable it would be if I just wanted to be a YouTuber. So I kind of pivoted my freshman year / 8th grade to trying to work in the multi-channel network industry. I figured that getting involved on the business was probably more lucrative than trying to just create videos myself. And through doing that, you learn more about channel best practices and how to have a strong hook for a video and what thumbnails get the best click-through rates and all of the data that as a creator, at least back in these days, you weren't necessarily paying attention to. So it was kind of through that I learned channel growth and these other skills. And that's when it became apparent to me that, I could get a job in the MCN industry. Fullscreen was like a real company at this time. Freedom over in the Philippines became a real company. And these guys were hiring. And I thought that if I did a really good job, I could eventually land a position. And so fast forward, by the end of high school, I was working part-time remotely for a network in Los Angeles called ScaleLab. And they initially hired me for $400 a month to do consultations with some of the channels in their network. And then they bumped it to $700 a month to do that, plus a couple of other kind of admin things. And then I would also get referral income from people I brought into the network. So like I was making like up to a couple $1,000s a month, which in high school for a remote job, which this is way before remote work was what it is today, it was awesome, right? I felt super rich. So that was how I got into it. When I graduated, I got offered a job at ScaleLab for $40,000 a year to move to Santa Monica. And it was one of the first times that I was like, oh my God, I can do this now if I want to. But ironically enough, I ended up saying no to that because I just, at this point in time, didn't feel confident about the direction of the MCN industry, which in hindsight was a fantastic call because it ended up going downhill very quickly. But there were a lot of subtle things that I was noticing that made it seem like it probably makes more sense to get a degree. Meanwhile, my parents would really appreciate it because my mom is a diehard academic. She got her undergrad, she got her master's from Penn of all places. She now has her PhD. My dad He's less academic, but he got his bachelor's and that got him a really good sales job. And then he built his career that way. So I would say that I thought about it very early, but I tried to be as practical as I could be.
So what did you do?
Well, after graduating high school, I went to VidCon in Los Angeles. That's when I met the executives at Scale Lab. They offered me the job for $40,000 in Scale Lab, or in LA. I ended up saying no because of the reasons I just mentioned. And at this point, I was fully intent on going to university.
Because I know you didn't.
Yep.
So,
but very serendipitously, a gentleman named Gary Vaynerchuk tweeted on Twitter saying, "Hey, I'm looking for help on YouTube. If that's your thing, email me." And
this is 2018?
2017.
17.
And one of my colleagues at Scale Lab tagged me in the tweet and said, like, Calvin's your guy. So that's how it got brought to my attention.
Love that.
I had been familiar kind of like with Gary for a few months at this point because my mom bought me the book Crush It. She was like, I think that this is like what it is that you're doing. I think it would be interesting. Took me like 4 years
to find. That's so cool that she bought you a book like that. Like,
that's what I'm telling you.
Yeah,
when I said it
cool.
back to my my mother being the one to encourage me to do these things, like when she saw that I was creating content and doing these things back in whenever the book came out, probably a year or two after it came out.
I think Crush It was 2009.
Yeah, so like 2011, she bought me that book.
Okay.
I didn't touch it until 2017.
Okay.
And then 2017, I read it that summer after I graduated. I followed Gary on all the platforms. Like a month later, he puts out this tweet. I get tagged in it from a colleague. And I remember thinking, I was sitting in my bedroom in Phoenix thinking, like, there's no way. There's absolutely no shot he would hire somebody like me. But fuck it. I have nothing to lose here. Like, I'll send him an email. And so I sent what I thought was the most confident email I could possibly send, where I said, "Hey, Gary, my name's Calvin Hamilton. I think the title was like, I would love to be your YouTube collaboration manager or something." And then first line of the email, bold font, "I know my shit." That next paragraph was me talking about all the work I had done in the MCN space, some of the creators I had worked with, the editing I did, the thumbnails that I had helped with. And then I had also gotten YouTube certified in channel growth and asset monetization because that was something that was available through Scale Lab. So I had credentials that were highly specific to this role that just so happened to come out as soon as I graduated high school. So like the stars really aligned for this one. And Gary replied back the next day saying, D-Rock and Andy vet him, and they CC'd them on the email. And the rest was kind of history. After some back and forth over the phone and having a few interviews, I got offered the job to move to New York. It was less money than the Scale Lab opportunity and in a more expensive city. So financially didn't make a whole lot of sense, but I thought that there was significantly more upside in the opportunity based off of who I thought Gary was in going to New York City. And I called my university that I was planning to go to where I had some scholarship money. And I essentially said, "Hey, is there any way that I can defer this for a year? I want to take this job in New York, but if it doesn't work out, I want to make sure that my scholarship money is still there." They said yes. I was like, great. I called Justin Novello. I was like, I'm going to take the job. And that's how it happened.
That's so cool. Love that. I still remember my favorite memory of you joining the team and being on YouTube, because I was running YouTube right before you joined. Literally published the video before you started publishing videos, and you did a phenomenal job. Was I used to publish the video at 12:05 p.m. every day. I don't know if you remember this. You remember it? Every day, because we were posting 7 days a week. So every day, including Saturdays and Sundays, posting at 12:05 every day. And because there was no way to schedule at 12 or 12:30, you could only schedule at 12 p.m. or 12:30 p.m.
30-minute increments. So
I would manually sit there and publish at 12:05 every day till the day you arrived, and you were like, "I don't know why we're doing this." I was like, "That's what Gary wanted." You were like, "Let's ask him." And I think that was such a cool learning for me right there. Was like, you were like, "Let's just ask him." And like, you texted Gary, and I was on that same text thread, and he was like, "Yeah, 12's fine, or 12:30 is fine." I think he had he didn't want to do exactly 12 because he wanted it to be a little after 12 and like things like that. And like, I was just doing 12:05, and then you came in and you're like, "All right, 12:30 schedule done." And not that it was that big of a difference, because at the end of the day, you still have to do all the work of putting the video together.
Mm-hmm.
It was just like such a small thing that has stuck with me forever. Is like, just ask, or just have the conversation, understand the why. And I just didn't do that. Mm-hmm. And this is back in 2017 for myself. I was 1 year into my time on Team Gary, and like 2 years into my time on Team Gary. So like I was still learning as like how things work, how things function. And like for me, that was like a good moment of like learning right there. And I don't know if you really realized that I had that learning moment, but we all remember that moment though. Mm-hmm. So that was a cool moment for me. But you started running YouTube. I think that was for the first time. And I remember Elliot coming in around 2016, 17 as well. Like
Elliot's last day was my first day. For context. Yeah.
Yeah. That's so funny. We got to get Elliot on the podcast. I remember you and Elliot were the first time, like we were seeing this whole rise of like people who were experts at platforms. They knew what they were doing in their niche. Mm-hmm. You were not a social media person. You were the YouTube person. You were the Instagram person. And that was really a cool thing to like see, because like I think it was the era where everyone has started focusing on Facebook ads, because they were blowing up, and like it was like becoming the new unlock. Mm-hmm. And everyone had started devaluing organic content. Mm-hmm. Everyone was like, oh, Facebook ads, let's put money in that. Mm-hmm. And not understanding that every platform's getting more and more accurate with how much information they can provide you to make better content on those platforms. I think that was this beginning of where we're at today. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think you unlocked that a lot on Gary's brand as well. So going back to that, so what was your favorite interaction with Gary while running his YouTube?
I would say that I have a couple that are particularly notable. I have one that is for sure my all-time favorite. We talked a little bit about it before, but I'll lead with two that I think might just be interesting for the audience. One was when we hit 1 million subscribers on YouTube, and we had to put in our request to the YouTube platform for the golden play button. Gary called me into the office and said, Calvin, what name do we put on the plaque? GaryVee or Gary Vaynerchuk? And D-Rock was there, Andy was there, and they were having a debate about this. And for whatever reason, I became the decision maker. And this is in a daily V, whatever number it is. And I would say that I'm a fairly confident, at this point, 18, 19-year-old. But that moment, I felt put such in the hot seat. I was like, do I disagree with D-Rock or do I disagree with Andy? Because I didn't want to push any buttons. So I played like the most middle of the road answer. And I was like, I think either one is good, but I'd probably do GaryVee or something. Anyway, Gary ended up saying, I think that's right. And so that was fun.
Why did you go with GaryVee?
I think so.
Yeah, we literally were discussing it like last week or 2 weeks ago. Like, we don't know where the plaques are.
No way.
Yeah. Gary doesn't really care
his
about
office
those.
Is crazy.
Like it's like, so we probably somewhere in storage. We should probably bring them out.
Yeah, sure.
Them back up, but
I'm sure that you could order some new ones if you ask YouTube.
Yeah, fair.
But so that was a fun moment. The second,
I was almost expecting you to just say, I should say Calvin.
That would be funny. Unfortunately, I was not confident enough to make a joke like that at that time. Mm-hmm. But the second one that I thought was very interesting, and this is when it became clear to me just how well known Gary is. Obviously, I see the numbers. There were a lot of people that were fans. I was getting DMs from people asking me to connect them with Gary. And, I was like, I'm like the 18-year-old intern. I can't help you, Yeah. And the moment that it became most real for me was when Colin Campbell had just left the business. And I, for whatever reason, took over as copywriter for Gary's blog and articles.
Interesting.
And so I was writing new blog posts on Gary's behalf. One was about IGTV when that was a thing.
Yeah.
The other one was about the Vayner barter offer in exchange for like 4Ds services and such. And I had to read Gary an article as he was leaving the office to go to his next meeting just a few blocks down on 10th Avenue. And so I brought my laptop outside and I'm reading the article to him, and we got stopped like 4 or 5 times for selfies in a 4-block walk. And I just remember thinking, like, there's no way we're going to get through this. We ended up barely getting through it at the end. But that was the first time that it was like, okay, this guy is a much bigger deal than I had thought that he was. I knew about the business and the connections and this and that, but it just didn't occur to me how real that was as soon as you step outside of our little bubble.
Yeah.
And then the third, which is truly my most favorite moment, because I think that it really speaks to his character, because single-handedly, the biggest question that I get about my time at Vayner is, what was it like? And really what they're asking is, what is Gary like?
Yeah.
Because that's what they care about. And the truth is, it's just what you see is what you get. You know, he's exactly the same person off of camera as he is on camera. And he's sincerely one of the kindest people I've had the pleasure of working with. And the moment that became the most clear to me was when I was thinking about leaving VaynerMedia. I was really nervous. I was 19 years old. I was thinking about leaving to start an agency business, and I wanted Gary's thoughts and his feedback. So I asked for a one-on-one. It got scheduled a week later. I went into his office. We had like 5 or 10 minutes, you know, as is life in the Vayner ecosystem. And I explained the situation. I said, look, I enjoy working here. I really like the team, but I kind of want to start a business, and I'm thinking about starting an agency. And I just want to know what you would say. To which his response was, I would love to keep you here. And if you're willing to stay for a year, I'm more than happy to try to help you find another job at whatever company you're interested in working at. But if you're dead set on leaving, do it. And if for whatever reason it doesn't work out, you can always come back. And it was like all of this weight had been lifted off of my shoulders, because I didn't fully know what to expect. I had a good sense, because working on Team Gary for so long, like, you just realize, like, oh, this is a good guy. He's honest, he's kind, he practices what he preaches, which really says a lot, you know, at least in this space. And yeah, that was single-handedly the moment where I almost felt like forever indebted to him. I've never really spoken to Gary in person since then. We bumped into each other a couple of times, or like, you know, we've never worked together since then. But ever since that moment, I constantly express gratitude to him. It's just like that solidified him in my mind as like such a fantastic individual, and feeling so grateful for having had that opportunity.
That's so cool. Thank you for sharing that, first of all, because I think as someone who's really been working on his brand for the last almost 11 years now, like I've been through so many versions of this where someone's been on the team, they're really doing well, they're crushing it. They're a very important part of the future that we're building towards the team. And then they want to leave. Or there's a version of, you really joined the team with like really high ambitions, but then you lost your way throughout because you didn't really love working on the team, or you didn't enjoy the work that you were doing, or, you know, life happens. Mm-hmm. Or the third version of it is, you started off really well because that is what you were really good at. And then as you grew through the years, you didn't actually enjoy it as much a few years later because, you know, like now you've reached the potential that you had for this role or this team. And now you need to go do the other thing. And in all of those 3 scenarios, all I've always seen from Gary is, let's do what's best for you. And then at the same time, let's make sure that you always feel safe about there's always a home for you here. Mm-hmm. And I think, at least in my time as a leader on the team, like for the last 5 years, like I've seen so many people that probably reach the point of like, this is the maximum growth here. Because again, it's still a small team. It's not going to keep growing forever. Mm-hmm. So this is my glass ceiling now. And now I got to move into Vayner and become a senior director or something like that. And we're doing a really good job. Mm-hmm. Or it's like you're going and running a brand that is in the family, and now you're their CMO or something like that. Mm-hmm. And just seeing those versions of like how Gary's almost built a ecosystem where like people can thrive and find their spaces. And at the same time, the third version of what you're doing is cool. This is what I did. Now I'm going and building my own version of what I want to build, which is what the Babbins and D-Rocks and so many other Caleb, Jason, like everyone's doing their own version outside. And then again, they talk in the same way about Gary, which is what really Gary talks about is this, the people that actually know me, how they judge me is what only thing that matters, not the noise on the internet and things like that. And I think that story right there is exactly the definition of that.
I'm sure that you have had as much experience as I have, if not more, with people who say they dislike Gary. And anytime I've heard somebody say that, they've never met him. You know, they see the videos or whatever and they draw some crazy conclusions, but anybody I've ever met that said bad things about Gary, that, you know, they had no real relationship. And everybody that I know who knows Gary, everybody says great things. So
yeah, I mean, for sure.
You know,
I mean, but at the same time, like, you know, like the thing that I at least realized while being around Gary is like, and I'm not going to say that everyone that knows Gary loves him. Like it's he's a human at the end of the day. Course. But if you can, with someone like Gary, at least, again, I always want to say this with the caveat of like, I have a big bias here. I run his brand. I've been part of his life for the last 11 years. Like I definitely really appreciate and love this human. But if people can hate someone as optimistic and kind as Gary, as much as he's willing to always give more than take, then you and I will never at least I can't compete with that. So it is also another way of looking at people will always find a reason to not like someone, and it doesn't matter till they have the full context.
One interesting thing is that I quite literally thought about the other night. Gary has part of his message kind of is along the lines of like, you shouldn't judge people. You don't know their baggage. You don't know their shit.
Yeah.
And I think that's real. However, I do think that if you have a strong moral compass that you have refined over a certain period of time, certain levels of judgment become okay when it is on the quality of the character that that person portrays and the decisions that they're making and the way that they communicate about people. It is difficult to have everybody fundamentally agree on certain moral standards. However, within reason, you know, there are obviously boundaries here. We can probably agree that lying is bad, or that treating somebody or even yourself poorly is bad, and a handful of other things. And I think that it's okay to be judgmental about those things, at least to some degree, not to the point where you would then be rude to that person. But the reason why I mention this is that the people who I tend not to get along with are the ones that we have those differences, which are exactly what you're referring to. They're negative. They talk bad about people when it's probably inappropriate. They're not always the most honest.
I agree with you. My perception on that has changed over the years because of just being around Gary so much. Like the way that and again, I'm definitely more closer to where you're at than where Gary's at. But I think what I'm trying to get at, and something Tyler Schmidt said on 2 episodes ago was like, he said something that really I thought was really cool and defining of who Tyler is as well. He said, I really don't like to have an opinion about things I don't need to have an opinion on.
I think that's also real.
He's like, that's a really good way of living life. Yeah. And we're going to get to the part where I'm going to ask you about like your advice for life. And maybe that is one of those. But like his advice was like, don't have an opinion about things you don't need to have an opinion on, you know? And it just keeps you out of things that you don't need to be part of.
Unnecessary drama. Yeah.
It's kind of another way of dealing with what you're saying. The way that Gary at least has kind of reframed my way of thinking about it is when someone's actually doing that or making the wrong decisions that you don't align with and things like that, the way Gary sees it, and I think it is the right way to see it, but I don't think I'm there yet, is that person is doing the wrong things according to you for two reasons. One, you yourself are probably over judgmental because you're equally as hard on yourself. You know, it's almost like you're probably judging them because you judge yourself as that hard as well. And you probably should give yourself some grace. That could be one. The other one is that person probably is going through something that is making them do that. So just having a little more empathy for them, rather than, back to your point, which is what you were saying, is like, you don't have to be an asshole to someone, but you can distance yourself from them, which is, again, I think there has to be a action to be able to do that. So yes, I agree with that. I think the other version is just like empathy of like, oh, this person's really making the wrong decision in life. They really got messed up somewhere. You know, something in their life is not right.
Yeah.
Because deep down, I think, and again, this is probably more idealistic than it should be, is like, everyone's a good human. They just are probably in bad circumstances. And some people come out of those and some people just stay in those. And that's what changes how people perceive them.
On a foundational level, I completely agree with effectively everything you just said. The one thing that I've definitely changed, and we can save the longer conversation for later, is that I've slowly learned that it's not my responsibility to help people fix that.
100%.
And so if somebody shows you that they have some serious issues that they probably need to address within themselves, it's not always your responsibility to A, make that apparent to them, but then B, to help them work through that, because they have to make that decision for themselves. And so subsequently, distancing yourself is an appropriate, reaction. I would also go as far as to say never treating somebody poorly, as you had said, just always empathetic and leave things clean.
I always talk about intent. Like, that for me is like so foundational to anything in life. Like, you can do the same thing with the wrong intent and the right intent, and the person on the other side can receive it in different ways. And all that matters is your intent. It doesn't matter what the other person receives it as long as you are doing it with the right intent. And that's something you have to actually audit as well. Like, you can't just be like, oh, my intention was good. Was it really? And that's the part that you have to work on. But like, if your intent's right, you're gonna make mistakes in life. That's fine. But being in a place where you actually accept where you were wrong, and the places where you could have done things differently, back to your earlier point of like choosing different words and things like that, like, that's okay. You got to give yourself some grace as well. But it all starts with intent. Were you trying to be the best version, or were you actually trying to hurt someone? Were you actually trying to make someone feel bad? Were you actually trying to pull someone down? Were you actually trying to be an asshole? Things like that. So I think intent really changes everything that we are talking about. Yeah. Because again, you have to take actions on what you want it to be. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So let's come back to Gary. You decided to leave. What did you do after?
So I left in March 2019, and immediately thereafter started an agency business. So you were on the
team for
about a year and a half. A little more than that. I think it was like a year and 9 months, but not much.
I would say average tenure on the team is probably around 2 years. A little less than 2 years.
That makes sense to me. There are a lot of people that were on the team for such a short period of time, right?
And then there's people that have been for forever. 8, 11, so that's where like the average probably is around 2 and a half. Yeah.
I remember when I joined Team Gary, I had this moment, not necessarily when I joined, but before I left Team Gary, I had this moment where I realized that when I joined, I think there was 21 people on the team, and I was number 21, right? I was the one who had most recently joined. When I left, we had about 35 people, and I was number 5.
Whoa.
Everybody else had gone, and there were also people who had joined and left in that time, and I was only there for about a year and 9 months. So there was a lot of turnover internally, but not in the way that I think most people would judge from, a high level where it sounds like all turnover is bad. Not necessarily. A lot of these people left because they got really cool opportunities elsewhere, where it was a massive win. And it's also a win inadvertently for Team Gary, because then these people go on to do amazing things, and then they say great things about Team Gary and how it helped them get there. And so it can sound a little daunting to say it that way, where it's like in a year and a half, I was number 5 out of 35, but not necessarily for bad reasons. So I think that is kind of like an interesting perspective on it.
This is why I started this podcast, because I do believe that a lot of impact comes from people that didn't actually, again, there's some of us that have been on the team for a very long time, but a lot of people like you, like Caleb, Jim Thompson, a lot of people that I've actually interviewed now as well, weren't there for a very long time, but their impact in the short time was a lot for the brand to be where it is today. Impact, short-term impact that built the foundation for more impact. And I think that's important, because at the end of the day, you came in for your chapter, but then you're writing your own story. Meanwhile, Team Gary's writing its own story.
Sure.
And it's the culmination of us sitting in this room right here is what really is the definition of Team Gary. And this is what Caleb and I talked about, is like the mutual respect we have for each other across the board.
Yeah.
D. Kirk and Caleb and Babin, we all talk about it. Is this, we were competitive with each other, but we also had respect for what we brought to the table, each one of us. And I think that really created this bonding that even today, literally have someone who's leaving the team in 5 days. She and I went for lunch yesterday, and we were literally talking about our kids and things like that. It's the bonding that you build while working together on the same mission that just defines the longevity of the relationship, I feel.
Yeah. I don't think that there's anybody from Team Gary who, if I ran into them while on the street, at a coffee shop, at a bar, that I wouldn't be happy to stop and talk for a few minutes, whatever the case is.
That's cool.
So I think that's a good indication of just the type of people and the culture that exists on the team. I left in March 2019 to start an agency business. At the time, my thought process was that I felt like I had hit my ceiling as far as technical skill set on Team Gary within organic posting on social. At this point, I was posting on Gary's YouTube, his Facebook. I was helping with some content on LinkedIn. I was doing some copywriting. I was helping run some ads. I was became a generalist within the space. And I could continue to refine my skills within social, doing Gary's content and his brand. But what I was more interested in was learning business. And so I figured a really good way for me to do that would be to leave and to try to do social media marketing and consulting for other clients, see if I could build a team. So I left in March 2019. And to fast forward, because there are a lot of highs and lows throughout the journey, and we can dive into some of them.
Yeah.
But after kind of 3.5 years, I had a small agency business of 9 full-time, which sounds a little disingenuous, because for full transparency, some of these people were overseas where salaries are significantly cheaper, but we also had some US employees and some other stuff, but 9 full-time around the world. And I had really learned a lot of the things that I ultimately left and set out to learn that would have been very hard to replicate within a large agency business like Vayner. So that was the incentive, but at no point in time was it I just hated working there. There were plenty of things. At one point, Gary was kind of tempting me in some ways to try to stay, where he said, is there anywhere else within the Vayner ecosystem that we can move you that would be interesting? And there was probably a real week where I just kind of looked around and I was like, all right, what's going on here? Because I knew that there was plenty going on within the business that seemed pretty interesting. But ultimately decided that if my goal is to learn business and how to start something and to grow it and to hire employees and manage them, I kind of just wanted to figure it out. And that in many ways perhaps was driven by the way that I learned how to get into marketing, where, I just looked up YouTube tutorials, just figured it out. Like that was a good way for me to learn. And after the 3.5 years, I had a nice little agency business with an intimate team. And that led to kind of summer of 2022, which is when one of our first clients came back and offered to acquire the business as a way of bolstering their ranks internally, specifically within marketing and social. And then I became the director of social at that company, which is Serhant in New York. It's a large real estate brokerage founded by Ryan Serhant. And yeah, I don't know. Did that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you were running this agency and then you got acquired and you became part of Serhant.
Mm-hmm. It was like an acqui-hire deal, which is essentially a very fancy way of saying that somebody more or less pays you like a nice bonus to join the company.
Got it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the business, the 3 years. Was there a point where you were like, is the agency business a good idea?
Oh my God.
Because I know there's so many people that, and especially in 2025, almost 6, because I'm pretty sure this is getting posted in 2026. There's a lot of people that now understand social media and are in a place where they're like, I want to start an agency because I understand social media. I'm good at it. I can start a 3-5 person agency and get some clients and work on stuff. And what would you say was like the lowest of the lowest points where you're like, I don't know if this is a smart idea, and what can people learn from that?
I mean, dude, there were a few. I had 2 separate business partners at different times when starting the agency. Both business partnerships didn't work out. Both
Did you
were with
co-founded or you started yourself and then brought people in?
Co-founded in both cases.
Okay.
Both didn't work out for different reasons. I think in large part, in hindsight, like I just had a lot of growing up to do. I know I was a very mature 19-year-old, for example, but the reality is I just didn't understand a lot of things. And one of the hardest parts about business is relationships and understanding how to deal with conflict so that it doesn't turn into some level of resentment, and that can foster into a worse outcome, which is that you start to dislike the person that you're working with, So no, there were a lot of hard things. Partnerships are really hard to navigate. It's like getting married, and instead of having kids, you have a business. That's your baby. Yeah. So that's tough. I also had it happen in a single month where, we lost like more than half of our clients around COVID. That was really tough. I remember being super anxious, and I rarely get anxious, but I remember feeling super anxious at the time about that. When I separated with my second business partner, Marvin, who's still a very good friend of mine. So these aren't like crash and burn the relationship. Like Marvin's a good buddy. Somebody that I lived with. So we were roommates actively in New York City. We had been working on the business together for about 1.5 years, maybe, when I came to the conclusion that I wanted to move in a different direction. And it was just a really tough conversation. It felt like a divorce. And that put a really big cold streak in our relationship for like 6 months. And then we slowly started talking again. And now Marvin's, again, one of my best friends. We get along great. He still operates the version of the agency that we had kind of split with. And so that exists now in the DACH region in Berlin. That's called Notus, Notus. And now it's at like 2 million a year in revenue and has a nice small team. Like things are good, so I'm really happy about the outcome there. But what I was saying, until my throat got a little dry, we had a single month in business where, we lost like half of our clients. And I just remember looking at the finances and thinking like, okay, shit, like, yeah, we have enough for rent, we have enough for this, but like trying to make sure that, we're going to survive and that we're not going to die. So there were times that things got stressful, but ultimately it teaches you a great amount about resilience. Another very hard thing was, again, so much of it just comes back to relationships and your ability to communicate with people and address things as soon as they need to be addressed and not wait. That was a really difficult skill for me to learn. Mm-hmm. Frankly, I would say that that's probably the biggest learning I had from running a business, was just learning to not wait to address things.
Yeah.
When something's happening and you don't feel good about it, talk about it. There's a great quote, which is, conflict delayed is conflict multiplied. And I live by that today. Anytime something feels off, I'm very vocal now. Another version of this was, I hired one of my best friends from high school at one point. He became an operations manager for us. And it sucked. It sucked. I think for a few different reasons. I did a poor job of setting expectations and communicating what I needed from him for it to work. I think us having been friends for a long time and not having had those expectations set made things a little blurrier. And so then having to fire my best friend from high school, or one of them, was just like a terribly hard conversation to have. And then I went home that year, and when I saw my friends during, Christmas, we had a long conversation outside of kind of this place where we were all hanging out one night, and he kind of broke down to me, and he was really upset about how it went down. And it's like, those types of things are tough.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard. It can fundamentally make or break relationships, but it'll also teach you a lot about how to navigate relationships and how to communicate and what you need to do to become a better leader. So the irony is that even though the lows are extremely difficult to deal with, as everybody kind of talks about, they also end up being the periods of time where you look back at it with some level of rose-colored glasses, because it's generally the time where you show the most strength, the most resilience, and the ability to identify the areas in your life that you need to improve in order to get to the next level. So, yeah.
I always tell people that, the best leaders are the people that are not selfish. It's easy to be selfish and like not almost deliver feedback or deal with the conflict because you don't want to come off in the wrong way and like almost like let people fail. But like the best leaders are the people that actually address and help, not address and just complain and move on, help and build on the situation to like always fix it towards a direction, which could mean that you need to part ways or whatever it is, but actually having the conversation. And I always talk about, if you have a problem with someone's way of doing things, they should be the first person to know. Don't go telling 10 people and then they hear it from other people, rather than if I don't like the way you're doing things, you should be the first person to know, rather than 7 people around you and then you hear it through someone else, because that just creates more, that breaks the relationship more, rather than me just addressing it one-on-one with you.
Absolutely. My first business partner upon leaving VaynerMedia was actually from the VaynerMedia ecosystem. I don't know if you know who I'm referring to, but I don't know if they're comfortable with me talking about it, so I'll leave it out. Unfortunately, I think that both of us, at least in hindsight, did a horrible job at a lot of these things. And so we went from being very close in many ways to now not really talking. I don't think either of us have any bad blood, but I look back at that all the time, and I'm so kind of embarrassed about certain things that I did and just so poorly. And it's not necessarily certain things that I did, but certain things that I didn't do that I should have done around communication, around expectation setting, around making sure that we were on the same page and that we felt the same way. And that when I felt a little jaded about something, that they knew that, where I was coming from and what rubbed me the wrong way, or vice versa. We didn't do that super well. And then when we stopped working together, we never had like a big fight or anything like that. But at the same time, we just kind of stopped talking, and it was a bummer because we used to be super close, and then it kind of died out. But I don't have any bad blood towards this person, and I wish that there were a lot of things that I had done better. But that's also where all the learnings exist, So I don't necessarily regret any of it, because I don't think I would be the person who I am today without it. But it's kind of a weird paradox in which you wish you had done things better, but at the same time, having had done things wrong is what now opened your eyes to the fact that you can do things better in the future.
Intent.
Yeah.
Last couple of questions, because we're almost out of time.
Sure.
After Sirhan, what was the next thing you did? What is it's Resi? It's now. So what's Resi?
So the truth is, it was a little messy. When I left Sirhan, I didn't really have a plan. I just wanted to start something again. And I told myself I would take a mini sabbatical to kind of figure out what that was. After about a month of sitting at home, reading, journaling, going to the gym, I got really bored and I needed something more to do. So I started doing consulting work with other agencies. And
at $400 a month.
No, it was a little more than that, but I started doing consulting work with other agencies that really kind of came from natural inbound, people reaching out saying, hey, I saw this outcome that you had with Engineer Influence, or saw that you worked at Sirhan and helped structure their studios team, or helped, with Gary's stuff, what have you.
Yep.
And so I picked up a couple of gigs there, and that became super interesting. But ultimately, what I kind of defaulted to was starting another agency business. And I was so torn on this because of the point that you made earlier about what do you think about people starting agency businesses? And I don't think I gave you a proper reply. There are two ways to approach this. One is that you do the custom scope agency where client comes in with a request, you kind of pull together the resources that are perfect for that request, and then you provide the service and, obviously whatever your cost of goods sold are, which are primarily the vendors that you hire, you keep that lower than whatever it is that they're paying you. That's your margin. That's a hard business. It's hard to scale because then when the next client comes in with a different set of requests, you have to find new vendors. You've never established proper economies of scale and you have so many different issues. That's a hard game to play. I didn't want to do that again. That's kind of what I did with Engineer Influence. And there were so many times that I was pulling my hair out. The second option here, in many ways, and there are more to this, but I'm simplifying, is doing a productized agency. You have a simple service that every client comes to you for that one service, like coming to a studio where you can film a podcast, and then if you want video editing on the back end, you can get it. It becomes so much easier to scale because you just have to hire for the same roles. And you can build out SOPs for it, and everybody starts to understand what they need to do within the organization. There's fewer question marks. It's easier to source the talent. And so I ended up founding a company called Engine.fm, that does personal branding for B2B founders and executives through podcasting because of a few reasons. One, podcasts are extremely versatile. When this episode goes out, you can chop it up and we'll get all the short clips. That's great. The long form goes onto YouTube. So you get omnipresence on every platform. We can transcribe bits and pieces that then make for great LinkedIn content. So it's very versatile. It requires very little input from the client in order to create a lot of output. The second thing is that we can book our clients' target audience as the guest on the show, which helps them meet new people that they otherwise want to connect with that might be good clients for them. And the acceptance rate of people being willing to get onto a podcast as opposed to a cold call is significantly greater. So it's so much easier to get your foot in the door with people that you want to meet when you invite them onto a podcast than something else. Cool. And then the third thing is that when we create all the content, oftentimes the guest says something that makes them look really smart. There are probably a lot of clips here where I'm going to want to repost that. And then anybody who follows me that doesn't follow Sid now knows about Sid and might follow you too. So you get cross-pollination of audiences. So that's the main service. It's a productized service. It's quite simple. Now, to be the biggest hypocrite in the world, the second thing that I've done since launching Engine, and Engine's been going well and we have a few clients there and things are good, is I actually launched a custom scope social agency called Resi. This only happened because I was doing this custom scope consulting work when I first started. It was interesting. I was seeing new sides of business. And I ended up just getting more and more inbound from bigger and bigger accounts where, to say it very bluntly, the numbers that we were discussing were large enough to the point where resourcing the service was not as difficult. So where historically with Engineer Influence, project sizes were as low as, call it $2,500 a month, all the way up to the biggest client we ever had was $30,000 a month. Now I've kind of consistently been getting some level of inbound for these social media marketing services over 10, 15K a month, up to like 25, 30. And at that rate, I can find a killer who understands a very specific service or deliverable that we need. I can bring them on full time or on a contract basis. And I don't have any questions about whether or not it's going to get done and get done well, because they have a track record of doing this exact thing. So I launched this custom scope agency. That's been going very well. I'm super excited about it. We have a couple of RFPs now with like these really big companies that if we land, that would change a lot. So that's the business in a nutshell. But I think that if I have any advice here, productized services significantly easier to do as opposed to whatever the hell the alternative is.
Love that. Cool. All right. To wrap it up. What's the one advice you would give to anyone who's thinking of starting a business but are scared to venture into it because they don't know what if?
Very stoic advice. None of it matters. And simultaneously, all of it matters. And so if you're willing to bear with me through this contradiction, you will die one day. Any level of fear that you're experiencing now, the anxiety that you have around what people are going to think if you fail, or what your parents might say, or what your friends will think, are completely irrelevant, because when you die, it quite literally cannot physically be a concern of yours, and nor will it be a concern of theirs. And everything is cringe until it's not. So you might as well create content. You might as well start the podcast. You might as well start the business and put yourself out there, because if it works, you will go from being the cringiest guy to the coolest guy. And it happens very, very quickly. There was a period of time when making gaming YouTube videos in high school that it was not super hot when I had started this. This was not when Ninja did the partnership with Drake and that all of a sudden clicked and now it was normal. Making Minecraft YouTube videos and Call of Duty videos in high school was not cool. There was a girl in my English class who played one of my videos out loud, and I remember sitting there wanting to die. But the thing is that none of it matters. I just don't care anymore. Now it's a funny story, but at the time it sucked. And you just have to realize that all of the time you have is rented. It's going to go away. You just have to go for it, because there is no real substantial downside. So you might as well give it a shot. There's just no good alternative.
Of doing this, like the one thing that everyone's said is like, I'm really good at interviewing, which was something I wasn't. I mean, at least because they're all friends, they're probably doing nice.
No, I think you had very thoughtful questions.
And to me, it's like, maybe this is what I should be doing.
Oh, yeah?
You know?
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of like, I would have never done this if I wasn't going to do it around Team Gary, because again, and for me, it's like always, I've always wanted to build Gary's brand, not my brand.
Sure.
But now that I'm at a place where I do feel like after 10 years, I can start having these conversations. It's a great way for me to like also document my journey, but also build a relationship. It's almost like I wouldn't be hanging with you if I didn't have this podcast. So I think it's a great way for me to meet.
Yeah. Get your foot in the door and 100%.
It's just, like just still having the relationships and like not completely being colleagues for the rest of our lives. And like, I think this is a great way to just do that as well. And at the same time, it's also helping me explore different avenues. Like 90% of the conversations I have with people now are on this podcast. Yeah. Which didn't exist 6 months ago. You know,
I have a podcast that I've never released still. I just need to. But it's almost been such a pleasure even to have it as a, like, if nothing ends up happening with it and I've just recorded a few episodes and they just never get published, I'm weirdly okay with that because the conversations that I've had have been so much fun. Where like I interviewed Aurelian, who's a good friend of mine, and I asked questions that in normal conversation I would have never considered asking.
Yeah.
And so I learned so much more about him through that experience than I otherwise already knew.
This is what I'm trying to do with this podcast as well.
Yeah.
Like, I would not ask you about your childhood in a normal conversation, you know? Like, it's like trying to get to know you as a human.
Yeah, of course.
Kind of cool.
I think it'll probably, over time, I would imagine you will become even a stronger conversationalist, which I think you're already good at now. But like, there are a lot of questions that you would be willing to ask on a podcast that you wouldn't ask in conversation.
Yeah.
And when you see how people light up during certain things, you can then steal that in conversation, and people will remember the conversations they have with you as a result. So
I want to make sure I do that.